make of Justin Trudeau's statements? He's saying we will not allow freedom of speech to be misused, and we have always acted against acts of violence or even threats of violence. Do you think he's being true to his words?
No, his words are hollow and they lack any backing or concrete measures on ground as expected by any responsible sovereign state which respects democratic values and which respects the sovereignty of other nations, number one. Number two, well, when they say that they will not tolerate violence, well, depiction of violence was on display in Canada at several occasions, whether it was Tiranga rally, or whether it was a depiction of late Prime Minister of India, Indira Gandhi, in a manner which portrays or which glorifies murder.
Yes.
So I don't see, his values or his words going any forward from his political compulsions back in Canada. So I don't see him meaning any of it.
Sushant?
At least he won't be able to bring anything on ground, literally. No.
Sushant, how should we see this? The fact that Justin Trudeau has at least been forced to respond, and obviously as a Prime Minister of Canada, he was not expected to say much else. He would have defended his own record and his government's record. But the fact that he's been forced to respond, do you feel that that in itself is some sort of progress, that questions are being asked?
No, I don't think so. I think the right-minded people have already asked these questions and are continuously asked these questions. The problem is with politicians like Justin Trudeau. He is actually, in a sense, playing advocate for terrorism by sidestepping the whole thing. He's being disingenuous when he says that we've always stood up against violence, because violent speech and hate speech is also violence. Because if you are instigating people to take to arms, you are openly threatening people with murder. You are threatening not just people with murder, you are threatening diplomats of a foreign country with murder, then that's a very serious problem. And if for reasons of political expediency, and even that is kind of surprising, because it's not as though all the Sikhs in Canada are Khalistanis. Number one, the Sikh community itself is a fraction of the total Indian community.
Yes.
Out of that, a fringe element is the Khalistani element. And yet, people like Trudeau, people like the other clowns in his cabinet have continued to stand, in a sense, with those fellows.
So
or
that was
with their alliance partner, that fellow Jagmeet Singh, whatever that clown's name is. That guy, he's a out and out Khalistani. So, and yet Mr. Trudeau thinks that, this is freedom of speech. Then I think he needs to get his head examined on what exactly is freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Because he never allowed this freedom of speech and expression to the Canadian truckers or any other people who were demonstrating peacefully. Out there, he cracks down. He brings the wrath of the government on them. But on this, he is like a pussycat on a wet day, hiding in a corner. And
nobody's bank accounts are being sealed, for example, as was done for the freedom movement. But can I just ask you, you touched on a very good point. One, obviously not all Sikhs in Canada are pro-Khalistan. On top of that, the population of the Sikh community, not just in the larger Indian diaspora, but in the overall Canadian population, is a very small portion. It is a few percentage points. Why is it that it's carrying so much weight, Sushant? Now that you've touched on this point, I want to understand from you that why, as you say, a tiny minority is being able to affect Canadian politics so much. Is it because of money, power, or otherwise?
Shivani, let me turn this question around. How many Italians in New York were actually part of the mafia? But the normal guy on the street is not a criminal. He is not a goon. He is not a thug like these Khalistanis are, right? So what does the normal guy on the street do when he does not even enjoy the state's protection? And the state in Canada does not protect him. Earlier in your report, you were saying about the abuse hurled on an Indian journalist, Indian origin journalist. It wasn't abuse. The guy was assaulted. And the Canadian cops did nothing about it. Yes. Almost as though, they were like those New York cops in The Godfather who were hand in glove with the mafia. That is what Canadian police is all about. And that is what Canadian politicians, like Godfather said that I have these guys in my pocket. That is what these fellows have.
But why? So the question I'm asking, Sushant, is why?
They are criminals.
Why
No,
do they
because
wield
are
so much
organized,
power?
They are criminals and the other people are not. That's as simple a logic as I can give.
Ramnik Mann, I read out all of these instances, and I'm not even going back many decades or many years. Just in the last 12 months or so, I read out these instances of provocations against India, some of them bordering on threats of violence, depiction of violence, as you said, and even obviously now threatening violence against Indian diplomats. In all of those cases, one pattern emerges, which is that these cases go nowhere. Then obviously, naturally, the question will be asked to Justin Trudeau of how have you stood by the safety of your citizens and just generally of Indian diplomats and of Indian sovereignty and integrity. As a global power, or as a country that has business with India, does business with India, you have to respond a little bit stronger.
So, Shivani, see, I have an opinion on this. That is that the Western powers want to deny India its rightful position on the global platform. Number one. Number two, they would also want to keep India in a jelly state, not as a liquid state, which would melt down and have civil rights or something, or become a solid state like per se China or Russia. So it's in the interest of the Western countries to keep India in a jelly state. That is number one. So I also feel, it's a matter of policy for these Western countries. I would not see Canada in isolation, but I'll also look at England and US for that matter. But now when these Khalistani elements or these separatist elements from all across the world, they are given shelter in the Western countries in the name of freedom of speech or, right to opinion or whatever, they would want to call it, number one. Number two, now, when they bring out a march called a Khalistan Freedom March, they would now need to wake up and smell their coffee that this Khalistan is actually going to become a sovereign nation, if at all, on their own land, not in India. Because, like Sushant Bhai rightly said, Sikhs in general, especially in India, are not favoring Khalistan or a separate Khalistani nation being carved out of India the way they are depicted in the maps or the representation that they give. So if Trudeau or Biden or for that matter, the British government are prepared to give away land for Khalistan or, a separate sovereign nation from within their own country, they're most welcome to encourage them. But when it comes to encouraging these people at the cost of India or to encourage them to try and bring harm to our diplomats in their nation. So though host nations have to finally take a call as to what are they supposed to do or what strong, stern, visible measures they have to take when it comes to dealing with these Khalistani elements, especially in light of the fact that international diplomacy depends on reciprocity. So if diplomats are going to be treated in host nations like Canada, the UK and the US, we might as well give them back the same treatment.
Okay, that brings me to the next part of my discussion.